So welcome to your introduction to political ideologies. Little review from our last unit where you learned all about political decision making. The purpose of government is to organize society for common action so that the needs of every individual can be met. If you remember when we learned about social organizations and social contracts, people generally prefer to live in groups because it's a lot easier to have their needs met. So some of these needs include economic needs, so like your food, shelter, your jobs, social needs, so healthcare, welfare, education, and your legal needs, so your law and order and national defense. Canada's government. So we know that there are 3 levels of government in Canada. We have our federal, so that's all of Canada, the whole country. We have provincial or territorial, so that's each province or territory has their own government. And then municipal, so that's the local government, so that's your cities. Some large cities are broken up into a couple municipalities. So freedom and equality, 2 words we've heard before. What do they mean? So freedom is the belief that the rights of each individual in society are of primary importance. So every person's rights are super important. Then equality, the belief that all individuals in society should be treated in the same way. So not only are their rights important, but everyone should be treated exactly the same. So all democratic governments, they attempt to balance freedom and equality. And then political ideologies have different beliefs regarding the importance of these 2 things. And you're going to learn all about different ideologies and their beliefs on freedom and equality coming up. It's not balance. Some ideologies definitely think one or the other is more important. Some ideologies believe neither of these are important, and some believe that both of these are of the utmost importance. So the political spectrum. When we talk about the political spectrum, we're actually talking about a line, and this is a line which we place different political ideologies and parties. So the line has a center, a left, and a right side. Then at the extreme ends of the line, both on the left and the right, represent extreme political beliefs. And then when we go to the center of the line, that's associated with more moderate or democratic beliefs. The origin of the political spectrum, if you remember studying about the French Revolution, came out of that, with the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So here's an image. This is what we know about the political spectrum so far. We have our left side, our right side, and the center. So, as we just said, the center of the political spectrum is associated with the democratic forms of government. Then those extreme ends on both sides, the left and the right, are what we call totalitarian. So democracy. Little review for you again. Direct democracy. This is where all citizens participate in government, and we know that it originated in Athens, Greece. And then in Canada today, we practice indirect democracy or representative democracy, where we vote for representatives to make decisions on our behalf. In a democracy, the state exists to serve the citizen. So this is the main point of the ideology, is that the government is there to serve the people. Now, totalitarianism, this big word that I said is associated with the extreme ends of the spectrum. So if you go all the way to the right and all the way to the left, that's where you find this form of government. In this form of government, the state or the government exercises total control. So you think totalitarian, total control. And the belief is opposite of democracy, where they believe that individual citizens exist to serve the state. So people are there to serve the state or the government. Here's what we have. And hopefully you are following along and drawing your own line so you can reference that as we go through the unit. So looking a little bit further, you'll often hear people say left wing and right wing. So here's what those things actually mean. So if we look on the left side of the spectrum, this supports economic equality and is focused on change and progress in society. If you go to the extreme totalitarian side on the left, that's where we find communism. And socialism and the social democratic parties are also located on the left side, but inside that moderate and democratic circle. So closer to the center, but still on the left side. See it here. Socialism and then communism at the extreme. What is communism? So a man named Karl Marx, he wrote what was called the Communist Manifesto, where he indicated that economic equality could only be achieved through a violent revolution, so that everyone should be equal and have equal amounts of money and no classes, but we need to achieve this through violence. So he believes that the working people, or the proletariat, would take power from their capitalist masters. So essentially the working class people fighting against the upper class people to all be equal. But again, fighting and violence. Now socialism, also on our left side there, but remember closer to the center, so democratic and moderate. The socialists also believe in economic equality, but not through violence, achieving it through the ballot box, so people voting for it. Democratic socialist political parties are found in most democratic states, including Canada. And a little bit later on, we'll look at where our different parties in Canada actually sit on the spectrum. So if we go to the right side of the spectrum is a huge supporter of traditional beliefs and values and generally oppose drastic change in society. If we go all the way to that totalitarian side on the right, we associate that with what is called fascism. And so because the beliefs of conservatism and liberalism, words I'm sure you've heard before, are democratic, they are both located closer to the middle or the center of the spectrum. So fascism, this extreme right, this is a political ideology, began in Italy in 1922 with the regime of a man named Benito Mussolini. And then what most people think of when they hear the word fascism is in Germany when the National Socialist Party was led by Adolf Hitler, and then they came to power in 1933. And this ideology was kind of a backwards philosophy. It really stressed strong military and racial purity. Here's the right side. We got fascism, and then our liberalism, which we said are both moderate and closer to the center. So, liberalism and conservatism. Liberalism, it is divided into what is known as classical and reform. So, the liberals were believers in progress of good men with reform, with reform liberals accepting more government intervention in the economy. So they believed men or people in general are good, and that if you have good people in government, the government should have more control over the economy to help keep things equal. Whereas the conservative view is not so optimistic about mankind and doesn't believe that people are inherently good, so that if the government has too much control, it's not a good thing. So they strongly support what is known as economic freedom. So citizens having control over their own money and the government being less involved. Here, so this is what we have. And you'll see liberalism is closer to the center because it can lean further left because there are multiple views of it. And again, we're going to get into that a little bit later. So political parties, I'm sure you've heard of these as we just went through an election last October. So political parties, they all derive their beliefs from those basic political ideologies. Some of them take pieces of one and kind of mash it together. Some focus only on one or the other. It doesn't really matter. So in a democracy, political parties are found inside that circle in the middle of the spectrum. Then political parties can be a little bit left or a little bit right of center, and again, in a couple more steps, you're going to learn about Canada's parties and where they sit on the spectrum. But a big thing that we'll repeat as we go through is that no political party is fixed in one spot on the spectrum. It's completely fluid and it changes from year to year or under different leadership or under different public opinion. So they do change. So when we look at Canada's parties and put them on the spectrum, know that those aren't their set spots. They change over time. So what you're going to do next is there's a handout where you're going to look a little bit further at the political spectrum. Another handout where you're going to look at political terms and concepts, specifically at the federal level, just to help you when we keep going through, you know what all these big words mean. And then you're going to do a little worksheet to start looking at Canada's political parties, and it has a couple quizzes to see who or what side you kind of tend to go with, I guess, or share values and beliefs with, just to give you a sense of what the different parties are all about. And then you're going to use that and you're actually going to do some research on Canada's political parties. So again, I hope you were drawing out your own little spectrum and taking some notes as we went. But thanks for listening, and you can get started on the next steps here.